Normally, I've tried to make it a point on the channel to go over the NHL's rookie race. We usually talk about this, and I will admit it was a lot funner doing it in prior years because there usually was a Vancouver Canucks guy in the mix, whether it was Besser or Pettersson or Quinn Hughes. But ever since the days of the late 2010s and the early 2020s, things have kind of calmed down a bit in terms of my overall engagement in the rookie race. That's not, of course, to disrespect Moritz Seider or Matty Beniers, but when it comes to the 23-24 Calder race, I think most people kind of have this idea that one Connor Bedard in Chicago is going to win the deal, but there is a very intriguing runner-up that I think, for at least some parts of the season, challenged Bedard in a pretty good way for that trophy. We're heading over to the Minnesota Wild and talking about Brock Faber. Because when it comes to Faber, I feel like a lot of fans of the NHL who haven't really been paying too much attention to the drafts and just kind of saw these guys come out of nowhere, you might be surprised to see just how much of an impact Brock Faber has had. And when it comes to his overall profile, just how good he has been. Because now, we're having this conversation about Faber not only because of his great season, but because of how much gosh darn money he could be getting on his next deal. Brock Faber is a Minnesota Wild defender, 21 years old, right-handed guy, 6'1", 201, signed on his ELC, which expires at the end of 24-25. He was initially an LA Kings draft pick in the second round, 45th overall of the 2020 draft. Back in this time frame, you could say that it was a little bit of a steal. You could say it was a little bit of a reach. Some outlets had him at the 37th overall spot, others had him beyond the 100s. So Brock Faber, as a US NTDP defenseman who didn't produce too many points, was seen as more of a wild card, depending on who you asked. The Elite Prospects Scouting Report Guide had him as a great skater who uses weight shifts well while gliding to avoid getting knocked over on the rush. There are some defenders who defend the blue line violently, others are more calculated. Faber suffocates the opposition, guiding them with the stick to the outside and enveloping them. As Faber's days with the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers continued, he actually started to do really well, and he eventually became the captain of the Gophers, and he was traded over to the Minnesota Wild in the Kevin Fiala trade. It was a really good deal, honestly, seeing that this guy was already playing in Minnesota. He had 27 points in 38 games played as the junior captain of the team, and eventually making his debut at the Wild, getting 2 games in the regular season and 6 games in the postseason. He started to get his cup of coffee as to what NHL hockey could really be like. Now, he didn't get any points in that sample, but he was just there. This season, however, Brock Faber has immensely skyrocketed to the top of the Minnesota Wild's depth charts in terms of D-men. Because in 74 games played, this is his rookie season, Brock Faber has 7 goals and 34 assists for 41 points. He is on pace for about 46 points over the span of a full 82. And throughout the year, it has just been amazing to see what Faber has been accomplishing. It didn't take long for Faber to start logging 25, 26-minute games in the NHL, and starting out in November, December, especially in January, you started to see Faber log up tremendous point totals. He was getting huge stints of continuous points, getting goals, getting multi-assist games, all while posting up some nights even 28, 29 minutes a game. This guy was an absolute workhorse, and when you watch the way he plays, you can totally see why he's being utilized as the #1 defenseman on Minnesota. He moves around so well, he's defensively sound, he blocks a ton of shots, he gets points, and he's got cardio to burn. This is an absolute workhorse, and if it weren't for Connor Bedard coming back and being as good as he was, there was a very legitimate debate to be had as to whether or not Faber deserved the Calder over Bedard, especially during the time where Bedard was injured. Had Bedard stayed injured for a bit longer, you could very well say this debate should have been more rampant, but ever since Bedard came back and started scoring pretty much a point per game like he was earlier, yeah, it's a lot easier for Connor Bedard to lock up that trophy now, considering his continuous point production. But when it comes to Brock Faber, the fact that his contract does expire a year from now opens the door as to what an extension could look like. Enter The Athletic, because you had yourselves an article published by Michael Russo and Shayna Goldman from March 28, 2024, talking about how the Wild's Brock Faber could get the richest extension in team history this offseason. Now, The Athletic is paid for material, so instead we're going over onto Spectre's Hockey from April 3rd, yesterday, because what Lyle Richardson does is he describes what it is that was talked about by Russo and Goldman. Take a look at this analysis. Russo and Goldman believe that Brock Faber could get the richest contract extension in Minnesota Wild history. The 21-year-old defenseman is in the second year of his 3-year ELC, and his performance this season could earn him the Calder Memorial Trophy as the season's top rookie. Some observers compare Faber to Boston Bruins defenseman Charlie McAvoy, who has an 8-year deal worth an AAV of $9.5 million. The Dallas Stars' Miro Heiskanen is earning $8.45 million a year for 8 years. A contract for Faber exceeding $9 million might make some Wild fans nervous, but the NHL is trending towards bigger second contracts for rising young talent. Russo and Goldman point to the Wild signing Matt Boldy to a 7-year, $49 million deal, which has an AAV of $7 million. They also noted that inking Faber to a bridge deal could mean a more expensive third contract. When Faber's next contract kicks in, the salary cap could reach $92 million. By then, the Wild's $14.7 million in cap space from buying out Zach Parise and Ryan Suter will drop to just $1.6 million annually until 2029. Now, when it comes to Faber getting this dollar amount, if you're a believer in Faber like most of the Minnesota Wild fanbase appears to be, I don't actually see a problem with this. You talk about some of the other defensemen in the NHL. Quinn Hughes is making just under 8, but I think that is like starting to establish itself as a huge steal of a contract. Cale Makar is in the $9 million range. Miro Heiskanen, as the article said, 8-point-something mil. This is kind of the territory for the top young-ish defensemen who play the game as well as these guys do, and who play the game as much as these guys do. Heck, you can even say that Brock Faber is, in some ways, a more relied-upon defenseman than some of these other top-of-the-line guys. It's very rare to see NHL defensemen get 29-minute games sometimes, but Brock Faber has done it twice. He's got 3 games at 28 minutes, and at 27 minutes, he's got 3 more. And those are all separate. Those are not all, the same game. 29-minute game also counts for a 27-minute game. No, he's being played a ton. Plus the point production, plus the shot blocking, plus the penalty killing. It's all there. He's so versatile and he's so skilled to justify this role that if you project him to being able to maybe get, let's say, 50, 60, 70 points a year, hey, give the guy $9 million a year. Especially if it's for 8 years. If you go the Austin Matthews route with this guy, sign a short-term, let's say 3-4-year deal at, let's say $7 million a year, by the time 2027 rolls around, this guy can demand even more money. He could realistically command 8 digits if he continues down this progression that we think is very well possible. Sure, it may be a risk, but when was the last time a defenseman stepped into a role this early in their career and was this good? Like, even Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes, sure, they produced points, more points than Faber has this year, but I don't recall them having too many 29-plus minute games. Brock Faber is one of the only guys in the Wild that's capable of doing this, and as a result, you have a very high amount of importance attached to that name. So how much money is that worth? Realistically, you could say it's in the $9 million range long term. You could say in the short term, maybe it's priceless. Who really knows? Especially if the Wild have some money coming off for Parise and Suter. The Spectre's Note part of the article we just looked at talks about how Faber has done a remarkable job filling the role of number 1 defenseman for the Wild during his rookie season. He'll be an RFA next summer and lacks arbitration rights. Wild GM Bill Guerin doesn't have to sign him this summer, and he can see how the young blue liner performs during his sophomore season before getting down to serious discussions. Guerin could be reluctant to invest in a big raise for Faber only to risk seeing him struggle to meet expectations. On the other hand, the cost of re-signing Faber will rise if the young blue liner exceeds this season's performance. Then, Lyle goes out there and says, I think Guerin will sign Faber this summer to an 8-year extension worth $9.5. Too much? Not enough. Who really knows? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as to whether or not Faber is worth this amount of money and how this